What's most interesting about poetry, perhaps, and especially Yeats's poetry, is that it never quite answers the question, what are you, right? It's ritualistic, like a spell, something you'd find in a ceremony of the occult. And Yeats was highly engaged with the occult. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Get that coffee. Delicious. From Guatemala. Today is The Tower, a poetry collection by the Irish poet and playwright William Butler Yeats, published in 1928. This was kindly gifted to me by my friend Margaret. Thank you so much, Margaret. I truly appreciate it. If you would like to buy me a book and help support the show and be thanked publicly by name when I review it, thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate it. The link for my Amazon wishlist is below. I do have to give the warning that the stack is very large at the moment, so it will take some time. A very helpful source for this review is a lecture given by Dr. Stephen Cheek that I've linked to below, entitled The Wonderful and Frightening World of WB Yeats. I highly suggest you check it out. This is my first time reading a collection by Yeats, the very famous Irish Nobel Prize-winning modernist poet who was influenced by romantic poets such as Keats, Wordsworth, and William Blake, and who himself was highly influential, and was enjoyed by authors ranging from James Joyce to Jorge Luis Borges. You'll notice the first line of one of his most famous poems, which is included in this collection, Sailing to Byzantium, and that line is, "That is no country for old men," from which, of course, Cormac McCarthy took the title for his novel, Friendo, and all that. Does he say Friendo in the book? I haven't read it yet. I hope so. That was very memorable. Also, Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion. She took that title from Yeats's poem, The Second Coming. When Yeats wrote the poems in The Tower, he was an older man, and old age is the subject of the eponymous poem The Tower, as well as a recurring theme throughout the collection. While there are many allusions, like indirect references in the poetry of Yeats, in my opinion it just means they're gifts that keep on giving. The poems can be enjoyed without knowing all the references, of which there are plenty. Historical, political, mythological, philosophical, astrological, there's a lot in here. Despite being a very short book, the scope of the book is vast. You can just as well read him on a more surface level for his exquisite lines and gain something from the experience, for sure. Or you can go deep. And for that, there are not only notes by Yeats in this edition, but also by the fellow who wrote the introduction, Richard J. Finneran. And Finneran's notes were also a very helpful source for this review. I highly recommend you read them when you read the edition. They're very, very helpful, very informative, very educational. Because there's a lot that Yeats is alluding to that is quite obscure, but fascinating when you learn about it. Really interesting. He reminds me a lot of Borges. Yeats and Borges have a lot in common, in my opinion. The kind of their interest in mysticism, their interest in myth, their interest in esoteric elements, occult, sacred things. There's some real crossover here. When I started reading The Tower, I had the flu, or a really bad cold or something. I'm not sure what it was, but whatever was stalking the region, and my voice lowered several octaves. Not quite Barry White, but while the other symptoms were damn near insufferable, I actually wasn't unhappy with that one. Provides a certain gravitas, especially earlier in the morning. Real quick though, if you got what I got and are feeling under the weather, first off, I'm very sorry. It's awful, isn't it? Or are having issues with your health of whatever nature, I'd like to direct you to the sponsor of today's video, ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a revolutionary healthcare platform connecting patients with top-rated doctors in their area. It's a free service and very easy to use. Maybe you need a last-minute appointment, or a new primary care physician, or perhaps a specialist. Or maybe you're having issues with places that aren't accepting new patients or don't take your insurance. Or maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed choosing from some random list. If you're having issues finding doctors who take your health insurance, or you just want the best available, I suggest you hop on ZocDoc and do a search. Again, it's a free service. ZocDoc makes it easy to search and compare doctors based on your needs, such as insurance, location, and patient reviews, ensuring you get quality care quickly and efficiently. And it's extremely easy to use in an era where all things healthcare related are typically by default more difficult than anyone could possibly imagine. So give them a shot by going to ZocDoc.com/BTF, or you can click on the link below. And thanks a bunch to ZocDoc for sponsoring the show. And so while I was reading The Tower, I began to read it out loud. That, I discovered, is the way to read Yeats. Read his work out loud. Hear his words coming out of your own mouth. Channel the voice of a dead poet so that he may live again. There's no doubt he'd appreciate it. And we'll talk about that. Writers and poets have discovered a method of immortality. They still live in the minds and mouths of countless readers to come. If they're very good, as Yeats certainly was, in a way, they very well may never die. A part of them, at least. And yeah, this sounds lofty, except when you think about it. You read them out loud. What directions is your mouth following to make the shapes, to make the words that you're expressing? Who wrote the directions? It's coming from him. When you think about like reading dead authors out loud, it's actually a very strange thing, because you didn't come up with those words. You interpreted them, but somebody gave you the instructions to form with your living muscles and your living breath certain words. That's kind of eerie, isn't it? It's actually closer to like possession, or like you've been inhabited by a ghost, like you're channeling him, like you're channeling a dead poet. You're channeling the ideas of someone who is no longer here, yet they are. An immortality of a kind, I learned in my research, was what Yeats was after. I don't mean that entirely metaphorically. Yeats was actually on a quest in his real life, through his interest in mysticism and the occult. You can see this in perhaps his most famous poem in the collection, Sailing to Byzantium, which has a real Coleridge feeling for me. It's very similar to Kubla Khan, in my opinion. The kind of tone, the kind of, you're going on a journey. You're going to see something far off in a far, far away, mysterious land. I'd have to think about that more, but yeah. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan and so and so and so and so. Anybody else getting that? Definitely, Yeats must have been inspired by Coleridge. I would be shocked if he wasn't. Let's see. Yeah, he was, for sure. Definitely. I think poetry possesses a special capacity for preserving consciousness throughout the eras. In a way that's different from fiction. It's more immediate. Because of its unusual nature, that is, consolidated, rapidly evocative, and often poignant, it's able to slip in the cracks of the mind, to infiltrate, like a virus, and breed. What's most interesting about poetry, perhaps, and especially Yeats's poetry, is that it never quite answers the question, what are you, right? It's ritualistic, like a spell, something you'd find in a ceremony of the occult. And Yeats was highly engaged with the occult. He was inspired by the Greek philosopher Heraclitus. He was interested in mythology and mysticism and the transience of life. And all these elements and many more are contained in his poetry. I learned from that lecture I linked below by Cheek that he was an eccentric character by all accounts, for real. He believed in ghosts, he believed in fairies, he believed he'd once been possessed at a seance. In that lecture, Cheek says that Yeats said, rationalism is the great sin against art. I don't know if that's the exact quote by Yeats, I couldn't find it, but that's the sentiment. Yeats felt that rationalism was antithetical to art. I'll be 36 soon, on March 10th, so I found this Yeats collection at an appropriate moment while in a contemplative mode of reflection on the passing of time, which, as many have said, are identified as one of the primary themes of Yeats's poetry. It seems to me that I've read poets who work with that theme, but never one where it's so prominent across the entire collection. There's a deep yearning and forlorn quality to many of the poems in The Tower. You get an image of Yeats composing these in trance-like concentration, solemnly staring out a window at dusk or early morning, during the transitional states of the day, the kind of magical times of the day, right? Those are my favorites, dusk or dawn, doesn't matter. It's very interesting because after I wrote that in the script here, I learned from that lecture by Cheek that I linked below that twilight has a kind of significance for Yeats. And I learned from the lecture as well that he actually wrote a book on Irish folklore collected from peasants called The Celtic Twilight. Do you ever find yourself in the early mornings or in the early evenings, in those moments where the caffeine hasn't quite hit, or the alcohol is still in early quantities, leaning to the side of your chair and kind of gazing into space, where your physical focus shifts, but you let it be that way nonetheless, because what you're looking at isn't the world around you, but rather the world within you? That, to me, seems like the space where this book lives, where it was written, where it remains still. That space wherein a person gazing out a window in early morning or early evening asks themselves, what lasts? What is without end? Reflection, 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 right? This kind of grand idealistic desire pervades the lines. I mean, idealism, inspired by romantic poetry, he's sort of a continuation of it, for sure. But, Yeats has a special kind. But there's a sublime weariness, a kind of splendorous exhaustion. You see a little moth there or whatever? The entire thing feels like the long sigh of a mystic, but also of a man who was deeply lonely and never really found love. He got married, he had kids, but there was an unrequited love in his life in the form of an Irish nationalist named Maud Gonne. It's not without sadness, but I wouldn't describe it as depressing. It places you in a meditative state, a state that is complex, that eludes binary descriptors. It's deeper, right? Yeats is concerned with cycles, old age, and the passing of time. The eponymous poem The Tower demonstrates this perfectly. He describes age as kind of a like a kettle, like a battered kettle tied to the tail of a dog, just following him around and can't shake it, right? But let's take a look at a couple of the shorter poems in this collection which perfectly distill these themes. One of them only 4 lines long. We'll start off with The Wheel. The Wheel. Through wintertime we call on spring, and through the spring on summer call. And when abounding hedges ring, declare that winter's best of all. And after that there's nothing good, because the springtime has not come, nor know that what disturbs our blood is but its longing for the tomb. So obviously it's about the cycles and seasons of life, but I read this as a disturbing commentary on our inability to gain satisfaction from any environment, any time in life. Always focused on the next thing, right? Forever. Never realizing that the only thing that will quell this desire, this anxiety, this unending need to move forward is death. I thought to myself that Yeats's contemporary Sigmund Freud's theory of Thanatos, or the death drive, seems right in line with this thinking, right in line with this poem. Check out this video I've linked below that was a helpful source for this review to learn more about it. Freud thought that we had these 2 drives, Thanatos and Eros, the kind of the will to life and the will to death. And he believed that our lives were governed by the tension between these 2 forces. So the Thanatos drive is interesting, Our unconscious need to return to the area before birth, back into the cosmic slipstream, right? Back into the flow of energy. Youth and age. Much did I rage when young, being by the world oppressed, but now with flattering tongue, it speeds the parting guest. Ain't that how it goes? With those 4 lines, Yeats encapsulates the entirety of a person's life. From our burning need to assert oneself, carpe diem, seize all that one can in the quest to discover who one is, to our desperate clinging to time slipping through our fingers. Life is kind of like that, isn't it? You sort of scoff at it when you were younger as if it were a pretentious party host, unaware of the potentially beautiful relationship or collaboration you could have with life. And only when you finally realize your mistake, you're being shuttled out the door. Grabbing on the door frame, for dear life, we might say, as life pries your fingers off one by one. It's brutal. It's funny, but it's dark. I don't think I've ever read a poem in my entire life that encompasses so much by utilizing so little. Sailing to Byzantium is one of the most epic poems I've ever read. Byzantium was Istanbul, in Turkey. Please see the link below for a fantastic reading of Sailing to Byzantium by the Irish actor Dermot Crowley. Sailing to Byzantium. That is no country for old men. The young, in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song. The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh, or fowl commend all summer long. Caught in that sensual music all neglect, monuments of unaging intellect. Whatever is begotten, born, and dies. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick. Unless soul clap its hands and sing and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing school but studying, monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. O sages standing in God's holy fire as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, pern in a gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. Consume my heart away, sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal. It knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. Once out of nature I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make, of hammered gold and gold enameling, to keep a drowsy emperor awake, or set upon a golden bough to sing, to lords and ladies of Byzantium, of what is past, or passing, or to come. There's so much contained within there about the quest for the human ideal and self-knowledge. That line, it knows not what it is. The mysteries of being human. The endless yearning to break our corporeal, temporal limits, to understand, to figure out what we are, in a life where control slips from us with every second. Yeats was plagued by this, clearly, as many of us would be if we stopped to think about it seriously. Yeah, that line, it knows not what it is. What I and many others must immediately think of is the fact that we really don't know who or what we are, nor will we ever, to the best of our knowledge. That's what Yeats is raging against here, like he rages against old age in the poem The Tower. The limitations imposed by time and body on the soul. This is the part from The Tower. Did all old men and women, rich and poor, who trod upon these rocks or passed this door, whether in public or in secret, rage as I do now against old age? Yes. There's a wonderful line in Yeats's poem in the collection Gift of Harun al-Rashid, which is, I am falling into years. I am falling into years. As Finneran's notes inform us, the gyre was a recurring symbol from Yeats. Finneran describes it as two interlocked cones representing the rise and fall of civilizations. Again, Yeats was definitely interested in mysticism and mythology, as is evident in two songs from a play, which discusses the rebirth of Dionysus. I'm reading the Mystery Cults in the Ancient World by Hugh Bowden right now, so that's definitely the territory I'm immersed in at the moment. Terrific, terrific poems. Easily the most visceral poem in the collection, and perhaps the most powerful, is the infamous Leda and the Swan. It tells the Greek myth of Leda's copulation with Zeus in the form of a swan. Unlike many other placidly erotic representations of the Greek myth, this poem depicts a disturbing, violent rape with tremendous destructive implications for the world, as it leads to the birth of Leda's daughters, Helen and Clytemnestra, setting in motion events that will lead to the Trojan War, with the birth of Helen, and the murder of King Agamemnon, the king of Argos, by Helen's sister Clytemnestra, the queen of Argos. That story can be found in the ORESTEIA by AESCHYLUS, which I reviewed last year. I'll leave a link below. Highly recommended. Leda and the Swan is strikingly different from the rest of Yeats's poems in this collection, which have that kind of hazy, evocative, mystical quality. This is a scene of brutal violation and mythological pagan bestiality, leaving little to the imagination, with Yeats going so far as to write, her thighs caressed by the dark webs. The swan's black-webbed feet holding her thighs, right? It's not subtle. And it comes out of nowhere. It's like, whoa, alright. He writes that Leda is mastered by the brute blood of the air. And that's a dark but clever double entendre. Brute blood of the air, as in a wild animal in the sky, a swan, a bird that flies, but also as a violent god that lives in the sky, Zeus. And it still plays into Yeats's whole themes of the passing of time, the cycles of nature and humanity, which Camille Paglia is always discussing in Sexual Personae, which I'm reviewing right now for patrons. And in Paglia's collection Break, Blow, Burn, wherein she analyzes famous poems, among them Yeats's Leda and the Swan, Paglia said the poem was about, as she puts it, the tragedy of history, and she called Leda and the Swan, as she writes, the greatest poem of the 20th century. And Paglia knows her poetry, you know. Make no mistake. That woman knows her shit. Yeats's interest in the occult was serious. He joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an occult secret society in London operating around the turn of the century. Another one of their members was Aleister Crowley, as was Algernon Blackwood, author of a great book called The Willows, and Arthur Machen, who wrote a book called The Great God Pan, which my friend Dana sent me, which is on my shelf and I really need to get to it. Fellow Irish writer Bram Stoker, author of Dracula, was friends with at least one of the members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, though not part of the group. Yeats, I'm pretty sure, met them all. According to an article from Mental Floss written by Ken Ossia Jr. that I've linked below, Yeats did not get along with Crowley. In the article, discussing an incident that's now known as the Battle of Blythe Road, and citing Yeats's biographer Richard Ellman, Ossia Jr. tells the story of how Yeats kicked Crowley down some stairs during a fight after the two men had hurled spells at one another, to little if any effect. Yeah. Man, the old days were something, weren't they? Link to it below. It's a good read. You look at something like poetry, this consolidated product of human imagination that unlocks something, makes something secret accessible, and potentially eternal. And it's obvious that Yeats was keenly aware of this. And he also had this heavy anxiety about old age, and growing older, and time running out. I think his fascination with the occult stemmed from a desire to discover the secrets, to reach the hidden ideals of life and existence through a method outside of art. As though he knew he was able to give a representation of something transcendent within his poetry, within his art. But outside of that, using magic, he sought the real thing. His real life was an extension of his poetic life, and vice versa. And though he may not have achieved a kind of breakthrough in the physical realm, to the best of our knowledge, in the artistic realm, it's indisputable, he did reach a kind of transcendence. His mind and spirit live on in the minds of those who read him. In a way, he has become immortal, which is what he was seeking. In and outside of poetry. It's wild shit. The best writing is a path to a kind of immortality, or the closest thing we have to it. If you write truly great stuff, that's the closest thing to becoming immortal that we have available to us. You know, it is within the realm of possibility. It's just very rare. The influence from Blake seems apparent, for sure. I think I might even spot an homage to Blake's line, lineaments of gratified desire, by Yeats's use of the word lineaments in the poem Gift of Harun al-Rashid. When Yeats writes, "The soul's own youth and not the body's youth shows through our lineaments," a very particular word. Impossible to use in poetry, probably, without conjuring Blake, so in no way am I barely knowledgeable about the depth of Yeats. But just from my very first reading, I am hooked line and sinker. This guy was onto something big, deep. I very much enjoyed this collection. I found it to be a mysterious and evocative experience, emotional, with poems that give you more on every rereading. There seem to be many layers here. Many layers. It's a gateway drug book, you know? I'm just barely scratching the surface of Yeats's iceberg of thought. One could easily make a video twice the length of this one analyzing any single poem in this collection. So I hope this served as a compelling introduction to one of the great, great poets of the 20th century, and of all time for that matter. Better Than Food. 5 out of 5 coffees. It is a masterpiece. Hope you enjoyed as much as I. And with that, coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching the show. I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who are financially supporting the show and I place their names in this mason jar. And for every review, I pull out a name. And whoever's name I pull out, I send a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And the coffee is delicious. Trust me, I'm a total snob. Currently from Brazil. If you would like to get in on that and help support the show, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. You can click on the link below or go to patreon.com/books better than food, and the tiers start at $5 per video. I make about 3 to 4 videos a month. Please don't forget to set a monthly limit if you're on a budget. Though if you do set a limit, please allow for at least 3 monthly charges to get the video call perk. The one-on-one video calls, right? Thank you. In addition, for becoming a paid patron, you'll get access to all this cool stuff. And international shipping is included. However, unfortunately, I can't send coffee to the UAE or Qatar. Thank you very much to all my patrons for helping me keep this thing going. It really means a lot, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Darl D. Thank you very much, Darl. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive The Tower by William Butler Yeats, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly, and I hope you love both. Cheers. Please subscribe if you have not already, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and always remember, die reading. Alright. Thank you very much for watching. Great to see you as always. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night, and I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.